Thank you so much for being part of the community. As a social emotional learning innovator, one thing that I am passionate about is helping kids understand the importance of respecting differences and the importance of communities, of there being communities where each person is valued. So today I have the opportunity to chat with Brianna Lynn Flinkow. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
So close. It's Flinkow.
Flinkow, Brianna Lynn Flinkow. I've known her for years, yet I still don't know how to pronounce her last name. But I'm excited to chat with Brianna. Brianna is a photographer, but she does many other things. She's very creative. She's also a graphic designer, and she creates jewelry. She has a jewelry making business, so she's a jewelry artist. And Brianna is a wife and a mom to three awesome kids, Lorelai, Aria, and Everett. And her oldest child, Lorelai, has been diagnosed with Down syndrome, autism. She also has sensory processing disorder and PANS. Now, PANS is pediatric, make sure I get it right, pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome.
Yes.
and she is diagnosed with some other things as well. So Brianna and her family support Lorelai in a number of different ways. And that has led Brianna to collaborate with another mom of a child with Down syndrome on a book called Looking Up the Truth About Down Syndrome. So Brianna, tell us about Lorelai.
Well, Lorelai's 9. So we've been at this for a little bit, the parenting thing. And she is a smart and sweet, tiny little girl, which is typical for kids with Down syndrome, that small stature. And she has had many challenges. So she was diagnosed after birth with Down syndrome with a karyotype genetic testing when we were in the hospital. And then before she turned 3, was additionally diagnosed with autism and sensory processing disorder, and then PANS and borderline atlantoaxial instability and borderline hypothyroidism all kind of came later. So she just has a lot going on.
Wow. Well, I've had the pleasure of meeting Lorelai a few times, and I also get to see all of your posts, your pictures that you post about your family adventures, and I just love seeing that on social media. So how did you come up with the idea, you and your co-author come up with the idea of looking up the truth about Down syndrome? How did that happen?
So Lindsay was the original creator of the idea, and it was based on both of our experiences when we gave birth to a child with Down syndrome. Unfortunately, that experience was largely negative. People tend to, instead of congratulating you on the birth of your child, apologize. And people tend to immediately talk about limitations and medical interventions and what could go wrong. So our goal with this book and the idea behind it is to change the perception about Down syndrome from birth to a positive one. It's called Down syndrome based on the man who discovered the connection of the traits, John Langdon Down, not because there's anything negative. So our book, Looking Up, is hoping to change that perception to a positive and hopeful one.
Well, one thing that I talk about a lot in my work is focus on the facts. And that's one of the reasons that I really enjoyed reading your book, because it was very educational, and it was the voices of people with Down syndrome and their family, just kind of setting the record straight as to what life is like, what it's all about, and just not focusing on limitations. So let's get into some of these stories. I believe the book has stories from, is it 50 families?
Over 50 families, yes, across the world, actually.
Over 50 families. And the book is divided into 15 sections. And the first section is called My Story. And there is a story in there. Well, all of the stories were amazing in that section, as well as in the book. But there's one story in the My Story section, which really stood out to me. And that's the story of Jen Strauss. And that stood out to me because what she shares could have been the story of any woman, of millions of women, in the world. It's not that different. And so tell us a little bit about Jen Strauss.
So Jen is an adult. She's actually older than I am, living with Down syndrome, and she is independently living. So she does not have any family at this time to rely on. She has her own apartment. She works. She has her job. Until recently, had a vehicle with car troubles. Again, very typical for life.
Exactly.
And she tells her story about same thing that everyone else is in the kind of realm of, which is talking about her relationship and talking about having to live independently and having to move and make financial choices. But she's one of those best people to get to know and to read about because she is an adult living independently. And that's something that people tell you is going to happen, especially when you have that birth diagnosis.
Right. And some of the specific things that she mentions in her story about relationships, she talks about having great relationships. She talks about being cheated on. She talks about leaning on friends and family for support, as she goes through these, ups and downs of relationships. And she talks about, I believe it's her cat, who
Yep.
also provides comfort. So I read that story, and I was like, this so many women can tell this exact same, pretty much word for word story. And to me, that really struck me because that is one of the misconceptions about people with Down syndrome, is that they can't live independently, that they won't have relationships, they won't get married, they won't have this, they won't have that. And this story is one of many which straightens us out. That is just not the case. So share another story.
So one that I think is just incredibly valuable is the story that's written by my co-author, Lindsay Robertson, and she wrote specifically this one. It's here on page 291. She wrote a story about her role in advocacy in the Down syndrome world, because until actually last year when they passed it, there was such a thing called limitations in organ transplant. And that means that every individual with Down syndrome was automatically disqualified from the option of an organ transplant simply based on Down syndrome. Now, thankfully, with her advocacy and several people in many states, this is state by state, they are attempting to essentially create a law that's called the Anti-Discrimination in Organ Transplant Act law that goes into effect in every state slowly throughout time. We're about halfway there, to tell people that Down syndrome isn't pre-qualification for quality of life. You can't determine what someone's longevity is going to be based on that. So that story, I think, is impactful to understand how not only are there limitations that are placed on us by society, but in this case, placed on us by the government. And it's a place that advocacy is really needed.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. Going back to some of the other stories where they talked about when the diagnosis was made before birth, there's always a question, you have this choice, do you want to go on to pregnancy or not? It just seems like there is an assumption that, this life isn't worth it. And having that discriminatory law or policy that, if you have Down syndrome, you are not eligible for a transplant, is another example of that. So that's definitely a wonderful thing that's happened and a powerful story. Now, you've told us a little bit about Lorelei, a little bit about your family earlier, but please share one of your stories from the book.
Sure. I actually, and my husband and my daughter, my other daughter, wrote several things for the book, but one that we wrote was basically about income and savings. It's about the financial situation that kind of comes along with the diagnosis. And we talk about all of those unexpected costs and things that you need to prepare for, and then also the supports that are in place that are structured specifically so that we can financially prepare for those things through adulthood, especially for individuals with disabilities. There are some safeguards and protections that you need to know about up front, especially in Illinois, because in Illinois, the way that we do things is by putting names on what's called the PUNS list, the Prioritization Urgency of Needs list. And that list is where the funding is pulled to supply services to individuals with disability. Unfortunately, in our state, the wait list is over 20 years long. So getting a child on that PUNS list at birth, as soon as you know there's going to be a need for services or for financial support through the state, is essential, because we're hoping maybe that Lorelai wins the lottery and gets pulled one day. And if not, that, you know, as an adult, even when she's in her 20s, we'll be able to support some respite or some other of her needs at that time.
So, you know, when you have a child with Down syndrome or any other disability, any other special condition, you know, the cost of medical care, the cost of therapy can be astronomical, even if you have, you know, decent to good insurance. Insurance doesn't always cover everything. And it is different state by state. There definitely is a difference, but there definitely are financial concerns. Those concerns aren't just about how we're going to pay for this therapy. Parents think about, you know, from the time the child is little, what's going to happen when they get older. You know, in some cases, there will be people with Down syndrome and other who have other diagnoses. Because of that, they will not be able to live independently. But many can live independently. They can work, so they have to worry. You know, they're wondering, okay, will my child be able to get a job? Some think, some go the self-employment route. So there's a section in the book called Employment, and there are some stories about people with Down syndrome and the work they do. Can you share a little bit about one of those stories?
Sure, absolutely. You bring to mind first, just because it's such a success story, about Karen and Kelly. Now, Kelly was born with Down syndrome, and she similarly is amazing with the support that she's received. But between her and her mom getting grants and funding and assistance from community college, we're able to start a business that is Kelly's business. She actually makes bracelets. It's called Special Sparkle, but she is able to find employment individually and also do other things. But with the help of her community and the support system of her mom and sister, she's able to go to things like craft shows and sell the jewelry and make custom orders, so that not only does she have skills that she's able to do, but she is independently providing for herself. So outside of ABLE accounts and SSI and SSDI and all of the government funding, which is only honestly ever amounting to a very small drop in the bucket compared with, you know, needing to supply for your whole life, having that self-employment possibility is working out really well for them, but an option that needs to be explored for a lot of special needs families, because typical employment either is difficult to come by, especially with demand for jobs these days, or is coming by with a small percentage of the pay that will not support a lifestyle.
In some communities, I know in our communities, there have been a few businesses that have opened in recent years that specifically employ people with Down syndrome, people with, you know, autism, and people with other disabilities. So that's amazing, and that is very promising. That more communities, more people are you know, have a goal to provide opportunities for people who have disabilities. Because just because you have a disability does not mean that you can't.
Right. And that's what I love about these companies that have been opening up. Hugs and Mugs is a cafe that's through Gigi's Playhouse in Hoffman Estates. There's Chez Francois Poutinerie in Naperville. And typically it's a parent or a sibling or a relative of someone with a disability. Find already a position that's likable or that's, you know, desirable for that individual. So in most cases, like Chez Francois and Hugs and Mugs, it's the parent who opens up the business that will employ more than just their child, but several in the community. And it's been amazing to see those things open.
Okay, as we wrap up, well, first I want to ask you to share 3 tips on how parents, caregivers, educators can help their kids just be more understanding of their peers with Down syndrome, be more accepting, be more respectful of their peers with Down syndrome.
Absolutely. Well, my first tip is to always meet someone where they are. You know, we communicate pretty openly. We're tall in comparison. But if you're going to talk to somebody like Lorelai, who's a little bit smaller in stature, getting down to her level and meeting her where she is not only welcomes her into the conversation, but it gives her a reason to want to be involved. She's not expected to step outside of herself and meet you where you are and try to look up or find you. So getting to someone's level is extremely important, and it shows respect. I recommend that for anyone at all times. My second tip is to look for nonverbal clues. There are lots of times when people are either less verbal or completely nonverbal who have trouble communicating. This is very likely in the Down syndrome community, as well as with some people who are autistic. There are a lot of different reasons. But making sure that you're not just listening for words you understand, but reading those nonverbal cues and trying to read someone based on more of their body language or whether they look comfortable or in distress, those things are incredibly valuable in communication. And then my third tip for everybody is reach out, invite, include. You know, people with Down syndrome especially might not always be the one that comes up and talks to you in the way that's comfortable for you and engages you, but that doesn't mean they're any less valuable to engage with. So by all means, please reach out, send that party invitation, go have a conversation. If you're with your kids out and about and somebody says, hey, what's that girl looking different over there about? Don't shut them down. Don't say no. Say, oh, let's go find out and have a conversation. It builds a more understanding world. So just reach out.
Thank you. Thank you for those tips. And I will post those tips in the group. And one last question is, how can people buy this book? And tell us a little bit about where the profits from the book go.
Absolutely. So this lovely tome, it's a little longer and thicker than we anticipated at the beginning. You can get it on Amazon. Just search for looking up The Truth About Down Syndrome and it will be on Amazon. It's also available in a Kindle version. And there are a few copies at the Light and Pine Collective in Batavia for sale, or you can order specifically through me or through my co-author, Lindsay. And all of the profits from the book are actually going to an organization called Nothing Down. Now, Nothing Down saw the same problems that I talked about earlier with those initial diagnoses, and they are trying to change the way the medical community views disability. So they have created a training video, essentially, that they're trying to get into every hospital, every medical training facility, everywhere they can, that talks about how to deliver a Down syndrome diagnosis and how to make sure parents understand the positivity and the hope that comes along with it too. So we support their mission. All the profits from this book are supporting it, trying to make that change in our country.
And I also want to mention that in the last section in this book is a resource section. So it lists a number of different organizations that you can go to for information or that you can support. So this book is amazing in many, many different ways. And I want to thank you, Brianna, for sharing some information about your book and being my first live interview in the relaunched Stacy M Design SEL community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.